This is a short video to talk about how to answer the Edexcel Specification A Unit 1 paper, which is focused on the era of the Cold War. On the left of the screen, there is an example of a past paper, and on the right of the screen is a PowerPoint that I'm going to be using to talk through how to answer the 6 different questions that are in this paper. Unless you have extra time, the length of this exam is 1 hour and 15 minutes, and during that time you will have to answer 6 questions. There's questions 1, 2 and 3 in section A, and then in section B you have a choice of answering either 4A or 4B, and then question 5 and question 6. There is also some extra marks available on question 6 for spelling, punctuation and grammar. Question 6 is clearly marked with an asterisk, and that indicates that those extra marks are available. Okay, first of all, let's talk about question 1. Question 1 is a very simple question. It's only worth 2 marks, and because it's only worth 2 marks, you should spend an absolute maximum of 3 minutes writing your answer. For the question, you have a historical source, which is here in this rectangle, and then beneath the source, you have the question itself, and it says, give 2 ways from source A which show how Dubček introduced a series of reforms which became known as the Prague Spring. And then beneath, you have space to literally write 2 sentences. Okay. As I mentioned, only spend about 3 minutes writing your answer. This is not a trick question. All you're being asked to do is to read the source and select retrieve 2 pieces of relevant information to the focus of the question. So in this instance, you have to retrieve from source A 2 examples of the reforms that Dubček introduced. I would have a highlighter in the exam, and if you read the source, it says he began to make Czechoslovakia less repressive and announced free elections. Dubček also announced a reduction of the powers of the secret police. So there is 2 reforms that Dubček introduced. He announced free elections and he reduced the powers of the secret police. But if you actually keep reading the source, you are actually given a 3rd reform that Dubček brought in. It says about ending travel restrictions to the West. Okay, so literally you would write your first reform here and then your second one. Don't spend too long on this or write too much. There is no need to use the attribution of the source, which is here, to analyse nature, origin and purpose. And just make sure that you read the question carefully. Highlight the focus of the question to make sure that you are retrieving from the source the required information. Okay. The next question, question 2, is worth 4 marks. And if you read the question, you will notice that the focus of the question is linked to the source that you've just used to answer question 1. So it says, outline 2 steps that Brezhnev took to oppose the policies of Dubček. So straight away, you might be thinking, oh, well, I'll go back and have a look at source A and see what I can find about what Brezhnev did. You will not find the answers to question 2 within source A. Question 2 requires you to start to use your own knowledge. Okay, so because it's worth 4 marks, you should spend a maximum amount of time of about 6 minutes writing your answer. And this question requires you to use your own knowledge. The answers are not contained within source A that you've just used to answer question 1. You've got space to write 2 statements. And what you're going to have to do in those spaces is write a very short, simple paragraph for each. And that paragraph is going to consist of a simple statement that is then followed up with accurate and precise supporting detail. So if you look on the right of the screen, the final bullet point, you will see I've given an example of what that simple short paragraph would look like. Brezhnev sent Soviet troops into Czechoslovakia. That is a simple statement. Around 500,000 Soviet troops and tanks were sent in to regain control. There is precise supporting detail. That's going to get me 2 out of 4. And I would then write a second action that Brezhnev took against Dubček, and that would then get me my 4 out of 4. Okay, question 3 starts to become a bit more difficult. Question 3 is worth 10 marks, and because it's worth 10 marks, you need to be spending about 15 minutes writing your answer. For question 3, you're going to have 2 sources. You're going to have source B and source C. One of the sources, in this example it's source B, but it might be the other way around in your paper. One of the sources will be a visual source. It may be a cartoon, it may be a photograph or a painting or something like that, but it will be visual. And the second one will be a written source, like source C that we can see here. It's very important for this question that you read the attribution of both sources. So that's the information given above both sources to tell you where they've come from, who created the source, and so on. That's going to be really important because in your answer, you're going to need to analyse nature, origin and purpose. The question itself is found on the next page. And the question says, how useful are sources B and C as evidence of the reason for the USA's involvement in the formation of NATO in 1949. And it then says, explain your answer using the sources and your own knowledge. And as I mentioned, it's worth 10 marks, so you're looking to spend about 15 minutes on your answer. Now, if you look at the top bullet point on the right of the screen, what this question is asking you is how useful are the sources? What this actually means is how much can you learn from the sources about the focus of the question? So in this example, how much can you learn from source B and C about America's involvement in the creation of NATO? You're going to need to write 2 extended paragraphs. One paragraph on source B and then a second paragraph on source C. These are the things that you're going to need to include in each paragraph. The first thing that you're going to need to do is you're going to need to give a judgment about how useful the sources are. And I've given at the bottom of the PowerPoint slide some example sentence starters. So you'd be saying things like, source B is quite useful. Source B is incredibly useful. Source B is fairly useful. Okay? Those are the sorts of things. You need to give a judgment as to how useful they are. You're then going to give some examples of what is useful information from the source. So what can you learn from the source about America's involvement in the formation of NATO? Okay. Now, when you're doing that, it's critical that you back up the points you make with evidence from the sources. And that evidence will either be describing the source, if it's a visual source, if it's a picture or a painting or a cartoon, and if it's a written source, actually quoting it. You then need to move on and you need to give examples of things that you cannot learn from the source. And this is where your own knowledge will be really important. So you're going to say, I can learn this from source B about America's involvement in the formation of NATO. However, source B doesn't tell me about this reason and this reason and this reason. And that's where your revision and your own knowledge comes in. And then the final thing that you need to talk about is nature, origin and purpose. And you need to use the attribution that's at the top of both sources to talk about how the nature, origin and purpose of the source affects their usefulness. Okay, so for example, with source B, it's a cartoon from an American newspaper. Well, that's going to affect its usefulness because you're going to know that it's going to be a piece of heavily biased propaganda. Okay. There's some sentence starters, as I've suggested, that you could use. So source B is very useful, fairly useful, quite useful, whatever your judgment is. From source B, I can learn. And then you need to give quotes and examples of the things that you can learn. However, the source doesn't mention, that's where you're going to start to give your own knowledge. And then finally, the usefulness of the source is affected by, and that's where you're going to start to analyse nature, origin and purpose. Now, just to give you an example of what I'm talking about, here is an example of a completely made up question that is kind of similar to question 3, but on a completely different subject. So, how useful is this source as evidence of mobile phone contracts in the UK? Okay, and we've got here, this is the source, an advert from EE. Okay, the source is fairly useful as evidence of mobile phone contracts in the UK. I've made a judgment. From the source, I can learn that the provider EE, and I've quoted it, offers a contract for, quote, $18.99 a month, and that for that price, the customer can get a, quote, Samsung Galaxy S4 phone. So I'm selecting evidence of what I can learn from the source. However, although the source states that you could shop around, it doesn't tell me the names or offers of any of the other network providers, such as O2, Vodafone or Tesco Mobile. So that third little part of that paragraph, I'm actually using my own knowledge to say, well, hang on a sec, it doesn't tell me this, this and this. And then finally, I'm going to analyse nature, origin and purpose. The usefulness of the source is also reduced by its purpose and who has created it. The poster has been made by EE to persuade new customers that joining them is a, quote, no-brainer. The poster is clearly biased, as the company want the customer to believe there's no point in even looking at rival offers and to take a contract with them. So I've analysed nature, origin and purpose. And that process that I've just gone through, I would do that, first of all, that extended paragraph that I've just written, I would do something similar about source B, and then I would do exactly the same for source C as well. Okay, so that's question 1, 2 and 3, and that is section A. Okay, and then we move on to section B. And the first question in section B, you have a choice of questions. You either do 4A or 4B. The start of both questions will always start the same. Okay, describe the key features of. Okay, and because it's worth 6 marks, you should look to spend about 8 minutes writing your answer. You should now be very, very used to writing answers to this type of question. The first thing that you need to be aware of is you should aim to write about 3 key features. Okay. However, it's important to remember that if you write 2 very well supported key features, that could be enough to get you 6 out of 6. The following things need to be in each short paragraph: a simple statement followed by supporting detail. I would strongly recommend that you signpost your key features to the examiner using these sentence starters. One key feature of the Bay of Pigs invasion was. A second key feature of the invasion was. A final key feature of the invasion was. That's really showing to the examiner that you know your stuff and that you're giving them exactly what they asked for. I would also recommend leaving a line space between each short paragraph, because again, that's showing the examiner you've asked for this information, here it is. Key features could be the cause of an event, so it could be the reason why the Bay of Pigs invasion happened. It could be something that happened actually during the event itself, so something that happened during the Bay of Pigs invasion, or it could be a consequence or an effect of the Bay of Pigs invasion. What happened next? At the bottom of the PowerPoint slide is an example of a 1 paragraph. So, first of all, a simple statement. One key feature of the decisions made about Germany at Potsdam was that the country and its capital would be split in 4. That red sentence is a simple statement. It would get me 1 out of 6 if that's all I'd written. Each area would be controlled by the Allies, Britain, France, USA and the USSR. There, I've added precise supporting detail, so I'm showing the examiner my knowledge. The same would apply to the capital Berlin, which was deep inside the Soviet zone. Again, I'm showing off my knowledge. Now that short paragraph would at least gain me 4 out of 6. If I've got a nice examiner, they might give me 5 out of 6. But if I've got a harsh examiner, if I've got a lovely examiner, it might get me higher. That's why you must write at least 2 paragraphs like this, but to ensure you're going to get 6 out of 6, I would always recommend writing 3 key features, okay? And that way, there's no way that you're not going to get the full marks. Okay, question 5 looks really difficult, but it's not at all. It's worth 15 marks, which is some of the biggest marks available in this paper. And because it's worth 15 marks, you should spend about 22 minutes writing your answer. You've got a list of 4 bullet points, and what you've got to do is explain the importance of 3 of the events in international relations. Now, international relations means the relationships between different countries. So if we look at the example paper, we've got the Truman Doctrine, the Hungarian Uprising, the construction of the Berlin Wall, and the end of the Warsaw Pact. Now, even though these are listed in chronological order, you don't have to write about them in the order that they're listed. You might start off by writing about the Warsaw Pact and then move on to the Truman Doctrine. That's up to you. You've got to pick 3 of them to write about, and that's where this question starts to look a bit more manageable. Okay, because basically the question is split into 3 and there's 5 marks available for each thing that you write about. You indicate your first choice by crossing whichever box is relevant, and then what you need to do is you need to describe the event using precise and accurate supporting detail. But don't spend too long on this, because the question wasn't describe the Hungarian uprising. The question was explain the importance of the Hungarian uprising in international relations. So, first part, describe the Hungarian uprising. The Hungarian uprising was when, and then use precise and accurate supporting detail to describe it. And then you need to move on and you need to explain why the Hungarian uprising was important in international relations. Take any opportunity to include precise and accurate supporting details, and if you can, talk about the historical context of the event. What was the situation before? What was the situation after? Okay, so I've given you a couple of ideas for sentence starters. The Hungarian uprising was when. This was an important event because, and that word because is forcing you to explain the importance of it. Okay. Also, look how much space you have got to write your answer. You've literally got just over half a side to two-thirds of a side of A4. Describe the event briefly, then explain its importance. And then you do the same for your second event, and then you do the same for your third event. And if you just repeat that process 3 times, you're going to get yourself 15 marks, which is going to really, really help you get a good grade. Okay? So about 22 minutes. The final question is question 6. Okay, this one is worth 13 marks, but there are also, you'll notice there's an asterisk next to the question, which means there are additional marks available for spelling, punctuation and grammar. There are 3 marks available, so that actually means the total amount of marks available is 16. Okay, you should aim to spend about 20 minutes on your answer, about 19 minutes. So we've got explain why relations between the USA and the Soviet Union changed in the years 1979 to 1987. And you've then got, it says you may use the following in your answer. It should say you will use the following in your answer, but they're being nice. You may use the following. And you've got 2 bullet points, the Carter Doctrine, Mikhail Gorbachev. And it then says you must also include information of your own. Okay, for this answer, this rectangle here is the start of a plan to your answer. You're going to write a paragraph on the Carter Doctrine. You're going to write a paragraph on Mikhail Gorbachev. You're going to write a 3rd paragraph giving a reason of your own why relations changed in those years. If it was me answering this question, I'd probably write about Ronald Reagan, but you could perhaps write about the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. It would be up to you. You just need to give a 3rd reason of your own, and then a 4th paragraph that is a conclusion. For each paragraph, you must explain how the bullet point was a factor in the outcome mentioned in the question. So you'd write about the Carter Doctrine, you would describe what the Carter Doctrine was using precise and accurate supporting detail, and then you'd explain how the Carter Doctrine changed relationships between America and Russia. You then go on and you talk about Mikhail Gorbachev. You would describe some of the things that Mikhail Gorbachev believed in and some of the things that he did. And then you would explain how he had an impact on relationships. And then you do the same with Ronald Reagan, or if you decided that you were going to instead do about the invasion of Afghanistan, you do that. And then you do a 4th paragraph which would be a conclusion, and you'd bring it all together and you would explain how the 3 different things that you've just written a paragraph each on were either linked together, how they all interacted to change relationships, Or you would prioritise them. You'd say, well, in my opinion, the most important reason why relations changed was the actions of Ronald Reagan. Okay, but it's not enough just to say the actions of Ronald Reagan was the most important reason. You need to explain why it was the most important, or explain how one event led to the next. That's what's going to get you the extra marks. So the best answers are ones that show links or prioritise the various events and have a conclusion that actually explains how the three things are linked together, or if you want to, how one is more important than the other. But most importantly, why you think one is more important than the other. Remember those additional marks for spelling, punctuation and grammar, and remember that you've only been provided with 2 factors that help to achieve the outcome. And to achieve the higher level marks, you're going to need to give at least one of your own. In the time you've got, you'll probably only have enough time to write about a third reason. So just to give you an example here, explain why you achieved superb exam results in the 2017 GCSEs. You may use the following in your answer: support of parents, awesome teachers. You must also include information of your own. So if you were doing this question, you do a paragraph talking about the support your parents have given you. Okay, you'd explain and describe the support they've given, and then you would explain why that's helped you or how it's helped you. You then talk about teachers. You'd describe the support that teachers have given you, and then you'd go on and explain how that helped you to get your fantastic GCSE results. But then you need to give a third reason of your own. So it could be the fact that you've worked out which revision techniques work best for you. It could be all of the weekend and holiday sessions you've attended. It could be the amount of hours that you've put into revising at home. You'd describe what you've done, and then you would explain how that has led to you getting those exam results. And then you do a conclusion where you would, again, explain how all 3 things linked together and contributed to each other to help you achieve your results, or how the support of your parents was the most important reason and why it was the most important reason. Okay, just some final reminders. Make sure that you use the question to frame sentence starters. This will really help you to make sure that you're focused on the question that you're being asked. So, for example, the Prague Spring was important in international relations because. That's really making sure that you focus on what you're doing. Use any opportunity to add supporting detail. You've got to remember, this is your chance to show off your knowledge and revision. You've done loads of hours of revision. Take every chance to add dates, names, people, places, anything that's relevant to show that you are an expert in this. Do not, under any circumstance, leave a question blank. Even if you can only write 1 sentence, write it, because that 1 mark that you get for that single sentence could be the difference between one grade and the next. Make sure you give yourself plenty of time to answer question 5. It's worth 15 marks, so at least 22 minutes. And question 6, which is worth 13 marks, at least 19 to 20 minutes, because there are huge marks available here. Be really focused on how much time you've got left. Think about the extra marks that are available for spelling, punctuation and grammar on question 6. That could be the difference between one grade and the next grade up. So take care on question 6. The next bit of advice is completely optional. You might find it helps you, especially if you've got a question that you're struggling with, to create a brief bullet point plan to organise your thoughts. But if you do this, don't take too long doing it, because you really need to be writing your answer. It is completely optional. Be aware of any dates in questions, okay, because that will make you think about what was happening at the time. And I would recommend for any of your exams, not just for history, any of your exams, take a highlighter in and use that highlighter to underline keywords, command words, dates in questions to make sure you're answering the question. When you're doing section A, you've got 3 sources to use for question 1 and question 3. Just make sure you're using the correct sources. It shouldn't be a problem because the way the paper is laid out, you'd be pretty unlucky to end up using the wrong source. But you don't want to be using source A when you're answering the question that asks you to use sources B and C and so on. So just make sure that you read the instructions carefully and you're using the correct sources. And then just take care with question 5. Just make sure you indicate very clearly which event you're writing about on each of the 3 answer pages. And the final thing to remember is good luck. You know, you've worked so incredibly hard these last 2 years. GCSE History is one of the most highly valued GCSEs out there because it's so difficult to get a high-level grade. You're all capable of getting a high-level grade, and this is your opportunity to shine and to show everybody how fantastic you are as historians. Okay? And once that Cold War paper is done, what you then need to start doing is thinking about revising for the Germany paper, which is on Wednesday, June the 14th. Okay? Shelve all the Cold War revision, all that knowledge that you've built up on the Cold War. I know it sounds cynical, but as soon as that paper is finished, you need to start absolutely hammering your preparation and your revision for Germany. And use those resources that I've put on Show My Homework, use the super facts, and if there's anything that you can't remember or doesn't make sense to you when you're revising, send me an email and I will help explain it to you. Okay, so I hope that's helped. And if you do have any questions, do feel free to email me.